Hi, my name is Jared Judd and I'm from the Data Standards Body, and welcome to our YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to explore the technical component of the Consumer Data Standards. This was held as part of a larger workshop on the 22nd of February 2022, where we introduced the consumer data right to the telecommunication sector. This video will have special guests or presenters from the Data Standards Body. They will cover off the technical components in the consumer data standards, as well as some telecommunications specific considerations currently being considered to incorporate that new sector. Please enjoy the video.
So what we're looking at here is the actual live standards. So we've got the technical aspects, but we've also got the CX aspects, but they're all here. So if you look down the table of contents on the side here, you'll see consumer experience is a part of the standards, but there's also other parts here as well. The technical standards are broken into 4 components. The introduction and high level standards are part 1, and that's really guiding principles, really things that apply holus bolus across the board. It's sort of like the foundational pieces. For instance, how do we structure our URIs consistently throughout the standards? How do we manage headers for communication back and forth? What are our principles for actually developing the standards? Like, what do we define as good? What are the trade-offs we're willing to make? How do we do versioning? Not just versioning of this document, but versioning of lower level components so that people can, this isn't just a build once and we're finished. This is an ongoing maintenance and we're going to have to continue, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of sections here in the introduction and high level standards, which is really important to get a grasp of first before you delve into the detail of the APIs. Now, at this point, it's worth noting that our standards are different from many other standards people are familiar with. So there might be some technical people on the call and you'll be familiar with standards like OAuth or RFCs and things like that. Most standards that are developed tend to be standards defined but optional, in that, I can adopt the standard or not, and maybe I'll tweak it a little bit and there's room to maneuver and things like that. Because our standards are specifically to create implementations that are then held under regulatory compliance, they're a bit more specific than most standards that are developed. But also, there's less room to move, and we do that deliberately to help participants, because if a data holder decides, actually, I don't want to use that algorithm, I want to use a different one, or I know the standards say to use these types, but I'm just going to leave out some fields, then data recipients, and potentially in the future there's hundreds of them, will, working across many different banks, energy retailers, telecommunication companies, won't be able to be consistent. They'll have to tailor their solution across many data holders, and it just won't work. So we are quite specific wherever it's needed to be specific to ensure data transfer occurs successfully. And this is why compliance and enforcement by the ACCC against these standards is a real thing and also important. Okay, so that's the high-level standards in the introduction and just a bit of an overview. If you're interested, you can go to this link, and if you go down the bottom here, you can see all of our archives and you can see our change logs. If you click on version examples, you get the non-normative examples, and we give examples all the way through. If you click on version delta, you can go through and you can find out exactly what changed between different standards, and we actually document specific changes. There's a version delta. So it actually says in this part of this is what was taken out and this is what was added. So if I click on the release notes here, I can actually see, okay, there was a change in the register APIs, and it describes what those changes were. The purpose of this workshop is for the telecommunication sector, which is coming into the CDR regime. At this point, you probably haven't got your technical teams organized, etc. The one thing I would say is, if you're on this call and you're a policy person, a program manager, someone involved interfacing into the CDR, but not necessarily technical, I would recommend getting a technical architect or access to one as soon as possible. We've been through the cycle now of 2 previous sectors, banking and energy. And the data standards body is now going to be tasked with developing technical standards between now and November for the telecommunication sector. And we will be starting to do consultations in the coming months, saying we're going to do these APIs, what do you think? And we're going to do these payloads, what do you think? We're going to do these specific fields to represent a telecommunication customer, what do you think? If you're facing into those consultations without support from technical people in your organization, you're going to struggle to give the feedback. So I would really recommend, as in the near term, I can't require people to do this, but I would recommend it, having gone through this a number of times, that you get access to some technical representation, business, technical analyst of some sort, an architect that is actually able to respond to our technical consultations with and see it in the context of your organization. You will get more out of the CDR. You will have an easier implementation at the end of it. We will have better standards that will change less if that occurs. Okay, so I've talked about the high-level standards in the introduction. The next bit to talk about is the security profile. Maintaining information security in the CDR is of paramount importance. It's our first principle, and it's something that we take really, really seriously. Obviously, however, the safest data sharing is when you don't share data. Just merely the fact that we're sharing data creates, from a cybersecurity perspective, a risk point. So it is inherent in the regime that sharing data needs to be done safely and consciously. It doesn't mean you don't do it, but it does mean that as soon as you start doing it, you introduce risk. And the information security profile is about mitigating that risk. It documents things like how a ADR, data recipient, authenticates with a data holder. It talks about how we secure transport protocols. It talks about scopes. It talks about the use of OpenID Connect, OAuth2, and other normative standards and how they're used. It talks about the adoption of globally recognized security profiles like the financial API grade profile of the OIDF maintains. It has a whole lot of stuff in it that's specific to cybersecurity and authentication. It's also, once you come to implementation, one of the most complicated parts from a pure technical build perspective. And it's also common. So the information security profile is not bank specific, energy specific, or telco specific. We have one for the CDR, and it applies to all data holders and all data recipients. And there's a number of reasons for that, not least the fact that we don't want ADR data recipients to be locked into the sectors. You know, a data recipient should be able to get data from wherever they're going to get value for the customer. So it might be combining energy and banking data, energy and telco data, etc. So that security profile is a really important part of the standards, and it's treated separately and specifically, but it's not sectorally specific, it's cross-sectoral. We then have things that are getting more specific to certain purpose. So we've got the register APIs, the dynamic client registration APIs, and so on and so forth, non-functional requirements, and then we get into the industry-specific stuff, the actual APIs that the banks build, the APIs the energy sector builds, common APIs. So we actually have things like customer data. An Australian is an Australian. There's no need to have different payloads for an Australian who has a bank account versus an Australian that has an energy plan. So we have common payloads for representing those sorts of things. We have some admin APIs as well. For the telco sector coming on, most of our consultation will be in this part where we add telco APIs to this section. We will consult on the other aspects of the standards, but we anticipate much less change than that, whereas the net new stuff will be in this section of the standards. And that is an overview of the standards as a whole. We maintain these completely in public. The site you see here, all of the source code and content that goes into this site is all on GitHub, and it's publicly in a public repository. And all of the changes we make, the consultations we do entirely in public. We're more than happy from a DSB perspective to meet bilaterally, multilaterally, etc., and to have chats, because there's a lot of detail here, and sometimes people need clarification. And have you thought about this? And having those conversations is really essential to our process. However, we don't change the standards through those fora. We only, you will get sick of me if you're engaged with CDR for a long time, talking to me and then having a really good conversation. And then I say, can you post that on GitHub? Because we do everything publicly. And it's because it's the best, sunshine is the best disinfectant, but also we have many stakeholders from data recipients to privacy, to consumer advocacy groups and so on and so forth. We have international standards bodies that keep an eye on what we're doing because they want to leverage it, for different jurisdictions and so on and so forth. So if we don't do things in public, we don't get the best outcome. So that's our principle. We do everything on GitHub transparently and publicly. That can be confronting for large corporations. Like we have had experiences in the past where certain, some of the banks or energy retailers that we've had to interact with had to change their social media policies to allow their CDR teams to actually post. If that's a case that might impact you and your organization, I would get on that immediately and start getting exemptions to your social media policy so you can interact publicly on GitHub, and you've got a process for if there's an executive that needs to sign off everything you do, that you have process in place. Otherwise, you will not be able to give us feedback, and then you won't have a voice, and that will mean the standards as a whole are lessened.